There are new questions on whether or not there will ever be justice for the 4 Americans killed in the Benghazi terror attack. Despite the president vowing action, one of the only suspects in custody has been let free for lack of evidence. That's a setback now. It comes as we're getting word that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton will testify about Benghazi a little later this month. But what about today? Republican Senator Johnny Isakson out of Georgia. And Senator, good morning to you, and thank you for your time here.
Good morning, Bill.
Can we now categorize this investigation as a cold case?
Well, certainly with the release of Ali Harzai, who was the Tunisian that was released yesterday, that's the last suspect that was in custody. The fact that we didn't have inspectors on the ground or investigators on the ground for 2 weeks before we finally acknowledged this was a terrorist attack and not a spontaneous attack. You know, information like that goes cold pretty fast, so it's going to be difficult, but there are questions that Secretary of State Clinton must ask, and John Brennan must answer, and John Brennan too. And that is why the information that they got in cables requesting more security never made it to the 7th floor of the State Department, and why there appears to be, as the Accountability Review Board investigation told us, a culture of pushback in the State Department on those requests for more security.
So you're saying that that is the golden question for Secretary Clinton when she testifies in what we believe will be about 2.5 weeks' time?
Absolutely, because, you know, they said it was a spontaneous attack for 2 weeks. Susan Rice went on TV blaming it on a movie trailer. It was only 2 weeks later they finally acknowledged it was, in fact, an organized attack. During that 2 weeks, most of the evidence that was on the ground became polluted or in some way tarnished. So we've got to reconstruct the entire situation. We need to find out who knew what, when, and why the culture of pushback on that information went.
Where is that trail of evidence, do you believe? How will you determine whether or not the 7th floor of the State Department, which is where Secretary Clinton works, was aware of that question and knew that answer?
Well, the Secretary is going to testify, and I'm glad her health is better. I'm glad her concussion's better, and we're glad she's coming back. But we need to know the answer to that question, Bill, why the information didn't make it, or if it did make it, why there wasn't a response for more security in Benghazi for Chris Stevens.
Listen to this in the hours after the attack at the White House.
Today we mourn for more Americans who represent the very best of the United States of America. We will not waver in our commitment to see that justice is done for this terrible act, and make no mistake, justice will be done.
The end of that statement, how do you interpret that now, 4 months later?
Well, it sounded like a commitment then, and it still sounds like a commitment, but the actions of the administration don't follow the intent of that commitment. We have got to hold their feet to the fire. We've got to get answers for the family of Chris Stevens. And for those diplomats around the world, Bill, that represent the United States of America in very dangerous places, it does not send a good message to have one of your diplomats killed. 4 months after they're killed, there are no answers, and there's even a question of whether there's pushback in the State Department on bringing security that's necessary.
Can you determine if there's an FBI team on the ground in Tripoli, 500 miles away from Benghazi? I mean, it still appears that that's a hot zone to go into, and therefore investigators will not. That has to be a huge impediment to figure out answers.
Benghazi is a very dangerous place, but we have investigators in a lot of very dangerous places around the world, and nothing is more pressing than getting the answers to why Chris Stevens died and why we didn't have the intelligence necessary to be able to defend the embassy or the mission in Benghazi when the attack took place.
Just one more point on that. Do you believe the current Libyan government is willing and able and ready to assist in this?
I think there's a willingness, but the ability to do it in Benghazi is very, very quiet. Benghazi is a consortium of Islamic radicals, extremist groups, terrorists, if you will. It's 500 miles away from the seat of government in Tripoli. It's a very, very dangerous place, and even the government of Libya has difficulty operating in Benghazi.
Indeed they do, and the history there is not good, too, with the Islamic extremists that have been festering there for years. One final question here. You mentioned Hillary Clinton several times in her testimony, how critical that is to you to figure out answers. Will you bring family members of the victims to do the same, to get their story?
That's going to be determined by the chairman of the committee as the investigation go on, but I think Secretary of State Clinton's testimony will be the trigger for what happens next. If we get some answers, whatever those answers might be, it may be necessary to bring the families forward.
Senator, thank you. Johnny Isakson, the Republican out of Georgia. We got some breaking news, Senator. Thank you for your time now.